Thank you guys for your patience. I know it's a little chilly today. Appreciate everyone showing up on the roof. I want to thank Gryphon Rue for helping set this event up. He's done most of the work for that, and I really appreciate it. Now, I want to thank Steve Knutson, Audika Records, Tom Lee for kind of welcoming me into Arthur's world in the way that they did. Tej Hazarika and his son Sage for making this book possible through Coolgrove Press. They also have a lot of other wonderful books if you want to check them out. And then we have an event tomorrow starting at 5 p.m. at New Blue in the Ukrainian village. Is that right? Lower East Side. Thank you. Not a New Yorker. And that's going to be a film screening of Matt Wolf's Wild Combination. I made a 40-minute narrated video looking into the archives and kind of an overview of the book. And then also Singing Tractors will be playing, or a variation. Oh, it is called Tape Hiss. Okay, Tape Hiss will be playing. Okay. All right. Some amazing music will be played by Tape Hiss. and then following that will be a dance party featuring Arthur's music, and sushi will be available as well. And that will go into the AM perhaps. So please show up for that.
Is it clear, the microphones? They're clear?
Yes.
Okay, good. Even if I talk like this, is that clear?
Yes.
That's better? Like that?
Closer's better.
Okay, good. All right, Matt, we finally made it here. My God, it's so good to do this with you. This
Very
has
special.
been actually months of anticipation. And Matt is here for the week, and so this is, if that wasn't totally clear, this is the second of 3 events this week that Matt is involved with, and an additional thing that he went to the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts yesterday, and there was some archival recording of him looking through some of Arthur's notebooks and scores with the composer-performer Peter Gordon, which may go on the website.
I believe
Is that right?
Plan, yeah.
Okay, so that'll be on the website of the New York Public Library. We're going to have a discussion about the book. I've read the book, really enjoyed the book, and so why don't we begin by just how you came to this incredible artist's work in the first place.
Yeah.
How did you just come across Arthur Russell?
Like many people, it was through Audika's releases that came out. I think it was 2005 when World of Echo was released, and a friend sent me the link. I was in Paris studying abroad at the time, and as soon as I pressed play, I was like stunned, and I fell back in my bed and listened to the whole album from start to finish, and was just absolutely captivated. And yeah, from that point on, as more releases came out, then Tim Lawrence's book, Hold On to Your Dreams, came out. Matt Wolf's documentary, Wild Combination, came out. And so I was learning more and realizing how incredibly diverse this artist's work was. I was just more and more inspired. And despite the documentary and biography, which were both wonderful, I had so many more questions. And my attention was going towards the metaphysical, spiritual, mystical aspect of Arthur's work. And so I wanted to go deeper into that. That's really what I connected with Arthur from kind of the perspective of mystery. And so I felt the need to go to the archives. So I reached out to Steve and made that happen, fortunately. And so I would spend hours in his office scanning documents, which I would then work on and analyze from home for several years.
How long ago was that when you initially heard his work and started looking into the archives?
The archive started around 2010, 10. Yeah.
So it'd be
About a decade ago.
This
Yeah.
is a decade's work in
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. And when you say the mystery drew you in Arthur's work, is that something that was audible to you, or something that you discovered through the archives?
I think it was audible to me, especially on World of Echo, where the language is obscured, the musical narrative is constantly being refracted and shifted to different perspectives. There was something, to me, very magical going on listening to it, something magical happening to me while I was listening to it, and yeah, I think it's very audible, especially in that later work of his.
And so, tell me more about just the genesis of the book. It sounds like you went to the archives and you made discoveries, but what you came across the biography and the documentary, but there were things that hadn't been addressed that you were more curious about to look into.
Well, the main kind of gap in both of their work, which really focused on kind of biographical and historical kind of context, was the music. And the first time I went into the archives and realized how many boxes of papers and scores and notebooks were there, I knew there was something more to be revealed through that. And I mean, I was like a kid in a candy store, because it was way more than I could have dreamed of. Arthur was constantly writing and constantly composing and using these very rather complex Rube Goldbergian processes to make his music, which could end up very simple, but the process, he was a very process-oriented person, so these archives were mind-blowing, and it was like cryptography to kind of go through them and try to make sense of his own process.
I noticed in the first half of the book, you address Buddhism, and you introduce us to different forms of Buddhism that Arthur engaged with that are all under the umbrella of Vajrayana Buddhism. And then the second half, structurally in the book, is really getting into the scores and the music and the things that you can't find in the biography or the documentary. And so let's talk about a little bit of biographical information with Arthur and his Buddhism. So how can we kind of set the scene for folks around his...
Yeah, well, at the age of 17, kind of having essentially run away from home, Arthur was in California and was arrested for marijuana possession. And the cops, I'm guessing to Arthur's advice, released him to Kailash Shugindo, which was a kind of a syncretic Buddhist commune in the Bay Area that was started by a man named Neville Warwick, who immigrated from Russia and kind of combined Shugindo Buddhism, which is a very kind of ascetic mountain folk Buddhism, lots of magical practices and physical kind of rituals involved, with an emphasis on fire ceremonies and fire walking. And he combined that with Tibetan Vajrayana, which came through the teachings of Lama Govinda. And Lama Govinda really emphasized the role of art, artistic expression in Vajrayana practice. And so those were the two kind of main lineages that Arthur got, Japanese and Tibetan Vajrayana, through this kind of wild character, Neville Warwick. And he was with that commune for almost 2 years, but Neville Warwick thought that Arthur gave music too much attention. It was distracting from his Buddhist practice. And they had a pretty contentious relationship towards the end, which kind of led Arthur to withdraw. And
he was a teenager at this time?
Yeah, 17, 18, and probably by the age of 18 or 19 he met Yuko Nonomura, who was an independent kind of Shingon priest.
This is in San Francisco.
This is in the Bay Area, yeah, San Francisco. He was a Shingon priest in San Francisco. Before that, Hawaii. And Shingon is kind of the parent lineage of Shugindo, the Japanese Vajrayana. Shingon is the parent lineage of Vajrayana in Japan. And so Arthur was already familiar with that. And what Yuko did was kind of focus more on the basics, more on the philosophy, more on the meditation practices. And he was also an insurance salesman. So he empowered Arthur to not only pursue his Shingon practice, but that he could also have a career as a musician and not be sacrificing the latter. So it was with that he went to New York in 1973, Arthur did, with instrumentals, his kind of main work, with the idea being that it was dedicated to his teacher, and the profits that he would make from his music career he would send back to Yuko Nonomura for the construction of a Shingon temple, which never happened. Arthur ended up finding a temple in the disco clubs of New York later on. But he came to New York really steeped in that Buddhist perspective, and it would evolve while he was living in New York, but it was really steeped in that perspective when he moved here.
One thing I wanted to point out that I learned from your book, the transition between being released to the Buddhist commune, headed by Neville Warwick, and then finding his next teacher in Nonomura. There's a philosophical difference that you made apparent in the first case, where people were, in a quotation that you have from Arthur, looking for their own individual spiritual awakenings, and it was focused around self-healing or self-enlightenment. But then through Arthur's work with Nonomura and subsequently all of this music that came out of his Buddhist practices, he could focus more on what the music was doing for other people, and that some of the goodness or good intentions, healing, those types of qualities, and gentleness, all of those things in the music could have more of an important meaning, an important relationship to the world, to go out into the world. So, in other words, I wasn't aware that Arthur was an esoteric Buddhist really until I came across your work. But now I'm hearing his Buddhism across basically all of his music.
Yeah.
Almost like bubbling underneath the surface.
That was my experience.
Right.
Once I saw it, it was kind of everywhere.
Do you think that he considered his work a transmission of some kind of spiritual transmission, or some kind of like doing good work in the world, if that makes sense?
I think that intentionality you're talking about, I think, was definitely there. At the same time, a lot of people close to him might say that he was also kind of a naughty schoolboy, or there were other sides to him. So it wasn't this kind of like constantly noble gesture in that sense, but there was definitely a part of him for which music served that purpose. And I think going through the archives, the thing that really, one page that struck me was with instrumentals. He also photocopied it, and it was with the 24 music papers, where he says, 2 notes alone in the world, parentheses, orchestra, together save the whole world's problems. And a lot of that work was based on 2 pairs of notes, just these collections of pairs of notes that Arthur was working with in a very strategic way. And I believe he was using those note pairs to meditate.
Wow. Right, so you've uncovered a lot of more questions in looking at the notebooks, and but so back to the timeline of some of his work. So he was working on this body of work, instrumentals, and so talk us through some of the discoveries you made in this massive body of work. Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah, Tim Lawrence definitely kind of outlined the basic nature of instrumentals, which kind of has 2 volumes. One is a more kind of pop-oriented rhythmic style that's nostalgically looking back at the pop radio music of the 40s and the 50s, volume 1. And then volume 2 is kind of what Arthur called the pop radio music of the future. And that is more ambient, orchestral, very slow, reflective music. And the scores in Tim Lawrence were kind of referenced as colored Cajun parabolas. And I remember reading that and I was like, what is that? And when you go and actually look at the scores, for this one piece, there's just piles and piles of paper. with pitches all over the place that even a trained musician would not know how to read because they're not set up in a musical way. They're set up in this kind of pre-compositional, quasi-symbolic way. But those colored Cajun parabolas are these beautiful, multi-layered, colored line drawings where Arthur was drawing melodies kind of intuitively, non-linearly through this kind of page covered with pitches. And what I found, largely through a grant application that Arthur wrote, where he kind of laid out the whole process very clearly, or as clearly as it can be laid out, I was able to piece together the different stages of the composition of the process, or the process of the composition. And it's tricky to even try to articulate with words, but he was basically creating a very strategic, rational methodology to induce a series of intuitive decisions. And the result of that was a full score, which he called the mother score. And that's one reason I call it the matrix system. Mother coming from the term matrix in Latin, and also the womb realm mandala in Shingon Buddhism is also called the matrix mandala. And it is possible that Arthur, this only came to me recently and I'm being speculative, but I think Volume 1 and Volume 2 might be reflective of the two mandalas that are at the foundation of Shingon Buddhism. The different styles and things that they're working towards reflect the nature of those mandalas. But yeah, moving forward, this kind of complex derivation of melodies from kind of a collection of pitches would be used not only for more compositional works, but also for the mutant disco works. 2424 music had a similar kind of compositional process behind it. And this runs up through World of Echo and Singing Tractors music. A lot of those comes from these pitch pairs, which was fascinating to kind of see, because this starts in 1972 and is featuring in his work up into the mid to late 80s. Basically throughout his life.
Yeah, one of the best graphics is so small, but these are the Cajun parabolas that Matt was talking about. These lines where it's actually melodies. They're all, it's a way that at this particular stage.
And there were 760 colored line melodies.
Yeah, this is a black and white image, but it's actually colored pencil. You can find the original image online. But he was writing melodies by connecting notes together, which is an amazing way to think about it, to write a melody from one place to the next. Well, you know about esotericism, so what does this mean in terms of this book exactly? You mentioned intuition.
Yeah.
I was curious, like, that seems like a fundamental part of esotericism.
I've always been drawn to metaphysics and mysticism since I was a teenager, though I'd always kind of kept it at a distance from me. And studying Arthur and studying the Vajrayana tradition that influenced him brought me face to face with it in a much more direct way with the traditions themselves. And I ended up looking back in time, kind of trying to trace a lineage that I felt connected to, musically, artistically, spiritually, as an American as well. And so I've been kind of discovering other artists back all the way to the colonial period who have kind of created music from a similar perspective. And to me, the esoteric traditions, being the inner disciplines throughout global history, I believe that those are the most advanced forms of intuitive discipline in human history, which is kind of the focus that I come from, and what I'm trying to kind of get out. And I hope people can get that from the book as well. It's a very special way to orient yourself and your art. So I'm speaking a lot to artists with this book and in general. But Arthur really kind of opened me, rooted me in that perspective, I would say. And yeah, for Vajrayana Buddhism, the Mahayana tradition, the other non-esoteric, the exoteric traditions, they project, enlightenment and Buddhahood into eons in the future, and you You hopefully attain that through the accumulation of merits over reincarnated lifetimes. And for the Vajrayana tradition, enlightenment is spontaneously generated in the moment through dedicated discipline. And that's why these techniques of mantra, mandala, visualization, meditations, those kinds of things are used to attain enlightenment here and now. And Arthur was constantly applying those techniques to his music. And I didn't find out about her work until later, but Joyce Bowden was one of the first people to bring out a specifically Buddhist perspective on Arthur in 2009 with a talk at NYU. And she would even say that when they would go into the recording studio to rehearse songs, that Arthur would ask for a moment to look at mandalas before he would go in to record or sing. But as I kind of lay out in the book, these techniques were at work in so many different ways, some direct and some indirect, but always kind of a pervasive aspect of his work.
We had that lunar eclipse on Friday night, and actually speaking with Peter Zuma, who's leading the Singing Tractors, he said that he still records or is aware of when there's a full moon to record via Arthur, and apparently he would mix on new moons.
Yeah.
But so to kind of close on instrumentals on that body of work, his spiritual teacher, Yoko Nonomura, initiated that body of work through presenting to him photographs of slides. And I think that's just important to mention that those slide images were Buddhist symbols of clouds and flowers and nature symbols that had particular meanings in Shingon Buddhism.
And they were from Mount Koya, which is a mountain in Japan, which is where his teacher Yuko Nonomura was from, born and raised. And that is also where Kukai, the founder of Shingon Buddhism, founded that tradition. So, yeah, the natural landscape of that area is sacred in the Shingon tradition, and that's what is being projected behind anyone who plays instrumentals, the way it's laid out in the score.
Beautiful. And it has been performed, Peter Gordon leading ensembles, who you spoke with yesterday, of instrumentals and using those same images.
Yeah.
Imagine if there was a Buddhist temple that had been built through those funds.
I know. Maybe one day.
So generally speaking, what bodies of work do you address in the book?
Yeah. Instrumentals is kind of the meat of the book in the middle. I go into his earlier works, which were largely settings of mantras and sutras in the Shingon tradition, and as well as insane mathematical equations. I had Princeton mathematicians look at a lot of these pages, and they couldn't make sense of the math that Arthur was working with. But that's like, for an example, Reach 1 is a piece that had just insane mathematical equations.
Fender Rhodes.
Yeah, for 2 Fender Rhodes. But from instrumentals, I go into 24/24 music. I go into Tower of Meaning, the collaboration Arthur did with Robert Wilson for the Medea production. I go into World of Echo and the Singing Tractors. Those are the kind of the main pieces and eras that I'm looking at. And, just to look at Tower of Meaning, for example, Arthur was working with the ancient Greek language from the original Medea play, and the way he composed it was kind of, as with instrumentals, a series of single pitches that become pairs, all based on syllables of the ancient Greek. Arthur was always working with the syllable, and that ties back into the seed syllables of Buddhist mantra and the syllables at play in Hindustani music. And you see that throughout his work in World of Echo. He's kind of got these strange squares of pitches that often have syllables of lyrics or overheard speech. And to unclear ends, those were used. But I think he used that process to kind of impose a certain kind of meditative intention to the lyrics he was developing or the music he was developing.
I hear so much dissolution of language in that music.
For
also.
sure.
There's that. What did you say about liquefying style?
Yeah, the raw liquefied style.
So Matt gave a presentation on Just Arthur's notebooks a few days ago at Archistratus in Greenpoint, and he projected images of the notebooks, and in the notebooks, Arthur uses an abbreviation that says P idea, parenthetical idea, and a lot of the philosophy that Matt's drawing from comes from these parenthetical ideas in the notebooks. And so one of them was, or a number of them referenced kind of like liquefying style, so that he didn't have a style to work from, that he could move and pivot at any point. Because we think of him as a multi-style artist, but actually at that point with World of Echo, you were arguing in the book, and I thought through the notebooks, very convincingly so, that he could, in the moment, switch to a style or no style.
Yeah, and you can kind of hear that, when he's switching effects from clean to distortion, or from like rhythmic pizzicato to a more lyrical bowed style. But he was fixated on a system, but whereas in instrumentals, it was this kind of drawn out, complex, nailed down kind of system. With World of Echo, by that era, he had kind of digested all of that and was really, like in his parenthetical ideas, he would say, searching for a system that can accept any input, searching for a system that can be abandoned at any moment. I mean, very unusual way of working, but he was constantly focused on that. And a lot of it had to do with creating the ability to have constant permutation, constant change, constant mutability. And so that's why repetition plays a strong role in the music, is through that repetition he can then work constant change around it. So it was it was certainly a form of minimalism. But he, in his notebooks, he actually said minimalism, basically he said, I'm a minimalist by default. But it's definitely a unique take on that.
Right, repetition had a different or a particular meaning.
Yeah.
And also going through these mathematical equations, like this is just one sheet of very intense mathematical equations for each one, but then other things that were about abandoning a preconceived idea.
Yeah. Well,
is that, do you find that in the Buddhism as well, of going through such a complicated ritualistic approach? But
absolutely. That's kind of the nature of what's called sadhanas in Buddhism, these kind of ritual practices that are intended to shake off the habitual nature of your mind and open you to a more enlightened state. And so, with the complex process of instrumentals, for example, which could often end up being like a lead sheet, just chords and a melody. The reason for Arthur doing that process that way was to, as he said, restrain melodic impulses and kind of shake off habitual thinking. And he would do that as a composer for himself, but also for the musicians performing the music. It had that role as well. And I talked about that with Peter Gordon yesterday, where it's like by democratically allowing people to draw the melodies out of his mother score and create these repeating loops, you're creating a situation in which you're attracted to the music, and when you're attracted to the music, you surrender to it, and when you surrender, magical things take over for you. And I think that's where interesting things come out of, and most musicians would probably be familiar with that. When you really surrender to the music you're in, you're not controlling it anymore, and something you couldn't have planned will arise. And that's what first thought, best thought really tends toward.
Chance favors the prepared.
Yeah.
Right? What about his disco music?
Yeah.
I mean, was he applying that mother score to that work as well? Was he composing using this matrix system?
Definitely not all the time. But with 24/24 music, he saw that as an extension of that work, and basically he saw it as taking it into the studio, and that's where he kind of really begins focusing on collage. And World of Echo is kind of the ultimation of that collage perspective. But yeah, 24/24 music, which is a very strange dance record with a wonderful cast of musicians from different perspectives, was definitely rooted in a rather complex symbolic process. But the Buddhism in the dance works, comes through more elliptical language and puns, and but also the kind of ecstasy on the dance floor.
Can you give us an example of some of the imagery and the lyrics that you're referring to?
Yeah, like go bang, show us the face of delusion to uproot the cause of confusion. I want to see all my friends at once. I want to go bang. That's a pretty strange lyric for a dance track, but if you look into Shingon philosophy and the construction of the mandalas, a lot of it speaks to the uprooting of confusion and the eradication of delusion. And go bang. I can't help but see the mandala when I ever hear I want to see all my friends at once, though it easily references everyone on the dance floor. I'm also seeing all the Buddhas and deities in the mandala. And the center of the Taizokai womb realm matrix mandala is Vajrayana, and that is the cosmic deity of emptiness, which all other deities emanate out of. And so all perspectives in this kind of Shingon philosophy are to direct one back to Vajrayana. And the major symbols for him as a deity, as the kind of representative of the ultimate mystery, are water and light. And Kukai, the founder of Shingon, his name literally means, I believe, sky, ocean. Mm-hmm. And so there's so much of Arthur's music that speaks to both water and to light, and oftentimes to the combination of both. One of my favorite tracks is off the recent Sketches for World of Echo called Sunlit Water, and it's just this beautiful solo cello World of Echo era piece that's about 10 to 12 minutes, and I can't get enough of that. But that to me is like sonically captures Vajrayana.
Let's talk about numerology.
Sure.
So,
yeah, that was a surprise. So, he had all these complex mathematics going on in his early work, and then by the late 70s, early 80s, he had met a dancer named Kirk Winslow, and Kirk was a numerologist and kind of turned him on to using numerology for his music. And so Arthur his notebooks are filled with these kind of alphanumeric codes for different band names he would explore, like REO Speedwagon or Lawrence Welk or whatever, and random phrases that he thought were interesting. And then he would apply that to his band names, to his song titles, to his album titles, and he would consult with Kirk to use the best numerological meaning. I don't know I don't know what Kirk's interpretation was. I asked Elodie one time, Elodie Lawton, rest in peace, and I was like, because she worked with very similar metaphysical methods as Arthur did in a more explicit kind of way, and numerology was a part of her practice. And I said, well, how did you and Arthur interpret the numbers that you guys used? And she went to a bookshelf and just pulled out kind of a dime store, numerology for beginners kind of book. And those all have kind of different interpretations, sometimes overlapping, but
what's an example of one that he applied? Like a name or a song or something.
I'm trying to think. World of Echo, I think, was a 7, if I'm not misremembering, and that is from some of the books that I looked at. That is associated with isolation and kind of a personal growth at a spiritual level, and that album comes after Medea, Tower of Meaning, which was kind of somewhat of a wounding experience, I think, for Arthur, in the sense that it led him to stop kind of pursuing larger orchestral composition practice. And so by the mid-'80s, he's withdrawing into a more personal practice, a solo practice, though still working with singing tractors and other ensembles.
Yeah.
But so the number 7 does kind of, with that interpretation, it could be I understand it, it could be something that reinforces his intentions going into a project.
We're going to make sure we have time for questions for Matt. This has been a pretty good sort of dissection of things. Before we move to a Q&A, is there anything that you want a topic that we haven't addressed that you want to bring up?
Now my mind is empty. Yeah. No, thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Gryphon.
Well, if anyone is curious about Matt's work, really any questions about his engagement with esotericism, he has a podcast called Secret Sound, which now has 41 episodes of about half an hour each. It's fantastic. I'm a subscriber. You should start charging people for that.
No, it's free.
It's amazing. Questions for Matt?
I was curious, though I know it's not mentioned in the book, your kind of personal thoughts or grapplings with Arthur's later obsession with beat music and techno. Like Calling Out a Context record, obviously, was a time where he's into things like 808 State, and obviously that's an extension of disco and houses all the same sort of thing, but I was curious if you kind of had found anything that kind of, tied the two together, his practices of esotericism?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've actually been kind of fixated on that recently. There's some quotes in the book that refer to Springfield, which is kind of a later house track in that style. And there's this 6 pages in the notebooks where Arthur basically writes this extremely articulate, intelligent assessment of his process. And he has like pretty large concepts where he's talking about the equilateral backdrop or floating sectionality, and even says that, using architectonics and the numeric process solely dedicated to the vowels. And I believe that's the Bodhisattva vowels. But those, that's something that he was pursuing definitely through those works. Even dance tracks like School Bell Treehouse, he described treehouse as a platform or a house with fewer walls, and a platform is a reference to meditation practice, and the song is about constantly learning. Yeah, but I'm kind of fixated on those 6 pages about Springfield right now. I keep coming back to that. Yeah, and I'm always learning new stuff too. Like I just spent the first time yesterday in the archives physically for the first time in a decade. And, mind blown all over again.
You also compose music, right?
Does Matt also compose music?
I can be louder. How
Sorry,
have you
don't
found,
have a wireless.
Have you found that as you've gotten to know him more, how your composing is evolving or changing?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, clearly a deep influence on me personally as an artist. Arthur kind of pushed me to find my own path, I would say. And for me, that's largely been through dream work. It's kind of my main practice. And to a certain extent, combining that with spiritual alchemy and sacred geometry. So I'm not going to go too deep into that. But yeah, it reinforced certain tendencies that were hungry in me. And I've been eating a lot.
Ernie Brooks.
Feeding the meter. But did you talk at all about bubblegum music?
Would you talk about that?
Yeah, it is called Buddhist Bubblegum, and but what's so-called bubblegum music, which included Tommy James and the Shondells and Crazy Elephant and 1910 Fruit Gum Company, all of which were bands that I can't say I liked all their stuff. Some of it was kind of, you could say, silly pop music, but the beat was hypnotic. And Arthur did appreciate that, as did the band I was in before I met Arthur, the Modern Lovers, which, you know the beat, it's the, I guess, 8th or 16th note, you know, the tick, 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 which also the Cars used to great advantage. And I think in instrumentals itself, Dave Van Teegen was doing that shake of that that keeps going through at least one of the versions of instrumentals. And it's significant and also funny and significant that the label for most of those groups was called Buddha Records. And had a logo of a Buddha, and the inner thing was kind of looked like a mandala. And you could tie it in even more, they were pretty much crooks. And before finding Audika and, you know, Sleeping Bag, you know, Arthur's big hit was on one of the labels, sort of like one of those labels.
Yeah.
Talking about West End and that whole thing.
Yeah.
But Arthur was fascinated by that element of the beat. And of course that tied in with the dance music he did later,
Yeah.
even though much subdivided in a different way. That's my comment.
Thank you.
So on the revised version of
Yeah. No, I just,
bring that in.
I feel bad for not including that more like historical perspective on the term bubblegum. In the book, I definitely used a more general kind of approach to bubblegum, being just kind of like pop music in general, or the most accessible kinds of pop music in general. But the fact that Buddha Records was the catapult of the quote-unquote bubblegum style is just insane. Thanks, Ernie. Yeah, they did influence the Velvet Underground too.
Shelley.
Well, I know that you have a recording coming out of your music, and also that you're working on your next project has very much to do with the interviews and the podcasts from your Secret Sound series.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to know about that.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to repeat her comment.
Okay.
So Shelley would like to hear more about your new music coming out, because Matt's a wonderful songwriter and multi-instrumentalist, musician, and also the future work with the podcast and how that could tie into text and book work too.
Yeah.
And Spirit is, Secret Sound project, which is so, you
Secret Sound, yes.
Thank you for your curiosity. I have a solo acoustic guitar album coming out on a new label in the UK called Crystal Cabinet. That's the label name, and my album is called The Living Mirror. That'll be on cassette and should be available in the next month or two. And Secret Sound, the podcast was always intended as a platform for a book. So I'm kind of developing a narrower version of that large history that is developed, and the book will be called The Illusioned Ear, and it'll look from the 1840s to the 1940s, kind of to similar esoteric perspectives on music and American history. And I'm also working on a interview series that's going to be called The Hidden Present. And I'm interviewing, so far I've interviewed painters, musicians, but also cellular biologists and chefs and other people from other perspectives, where I'm kind of focusing on inspiration and intuition in the creative process. And yeah, kind of with less of the occult baggage that's pervades Secret Sound, but also not excluding that at all. So that's what I'm jumping into both of those projects as soon as I get back from New York, and that's going to be 2022. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
I think we have time for one or two more questions, actually, before you run into sound. If there are any burning questions, or okay, in front row.
Oh, Greg. What? Hey.
What was your favorite discovery in the archives and papers and all that stuff?
Oh.
What was your favorite discovery in all of the papers and in the archives?
I mean, since my eyes were kind of looking for direct Buddhist references, discovering Arthur writing very specific kinds of mantras and notating mandala geography in his notebooks, and in the mid to late 80s was kind of mind-blowing. But it was really just the notebooks, just his mind kind of spilling onto the page in this crystalline way. The hilariousness of he was hilarious. So I found myself laughing a lot reading the notebooks. And so it's this combination of like genius, like total genius, total intellectual genius, and then just like huge heart comedy. And that combination to me was so special, is so special, and so rare. So yeah, that was the favorite thing to me. Just reading that happen.
So during the break before the music happens, I encourage you to check out the Rosemary Mayer show on the first floor, which is amazing, and the printed matter book selection. We're going to try and get the sound up and running really quickly, and have the Singing Tractors perform for you shortly. Thank you very much for sticking out.